Are you upset at Premier Doug Ford for running this ad? If this is true that this ad spoiled something that was very close?
Look,
We finally know what happened. Welcome back to Moose on the Loose. My name's David. A new report coming from Politico reveals exactly why the trade deal between Canada and America imploded back in October. Here it is from Politico, 16 days from momentum to meltdown in Canada-US trade talks. This article has an insider who basically names everything that happened here, why the trade deal blew up. It says Prime Minister Mark Carney left the White House early in October with Canada and U.S. in reach of a trade deal. This appeared to be imminent. It says here inside the meeting, U.S. officials were enthusiastic about a possible agreement covering steel, aluminum, uranium, and energy. Canadian and American negotiators were told to put the framework on paper with the goal of finalizing an interim deal before American Thanksgiving. It was an awesome meeting, said Pete Hoekstra, U.S. ambassador to Canada. He recently told Politico, it went so well that President Donald Trump invited Carney and his delegation back into the Oval Office to show off the White House ballroom plans, even asking the Prime Minister for advice on the design. The Canadians were then ushered into a nearby office and offered Trump-branded memorabilia. During the discussion, Carney brought up Keystone XL pipeline, which would transport oil from northern Alberta to the U.S. Midwest. They almost jumped across the table to embrace their Canadian counterparts, said Hoekstra. They were thrilled. Going on here, it says the deal would have introduced tariff rate quotas on steel, permitting a fixed volume to enter at lower tariffs before higher duties applied beyond that threshold. According to an official familiar with the Canada-US trade talks, the individual, like others interviewed for this story, was granted anonymity to speak candidly about the negotiations. So this article goes on to say how Doug Ford was blamed with his ad, but it really wasn't Doug Ford and this Reagan ad that was a catalyst that broke this deal. This was just the front that was put up. Now, they don't mention why. I'll get to that at the end. Here's footage back from the end of October. Mark Carney knew what was going on. He chose to let all of this fall on Doug Ford's shoulders.
President Trump says he's canceled these trade talks because he's upset about the Ontario government ad. We've heard from the Business Council of Canada and even some of President Trump's own advisors who suggest the frustration with Canada runs deeper. So is this about the ads or is this about something else?
I would suggest you take the president at his word for his reason. Those ads came. The president had the reactions which you have seen, made the decisions that he has made, which, you know, those are his decisions to take. And we're in the situation we're in.
It says 3 officials familiar with the negotiations say talks had already started to fall apart, and this was before the Doug Ford ad. It says concerns were growing about the auto sector was being left out of the deal, along with backlash over Industry Minister Melanie Joly's threats against U.S. automakers, which added another irritant to high-stakes negotiations. While the public followed over the ad made headlines, it was finer policy details out of Ottawa, particularly around autos, that alarmed Detroit. On October 15th, the day after Ford announced the anti-tariff ad, Canada's industry minister wrote to Stellantis Chief Executive Officer Antonio Filosa, threatening to sue the company over its decision to move its Jeep production plant from Brampton, Ontario to Belvedere, Illinois. After the companies announced plans to cut jobs and scale back vehicle production in Ontario, Joly also threatened to claw back millions the government of Canada had doled out to Stellantis and GM. So basically, Melanie Joly, her actions with the auto industry created a big rift. She pissed off the industry, and the industry is very prevalent on both sides of the border. That industry and those CEOs got really angry about this. It says here on October 23rd, Finance Minister Francois-Philippe Champagne and Joly reduced how many vehicles Stellantis and GM could import tariff-free, effectively raising their costs. That evening, Trump abruptly halted all trade negotiations with Canada. While the president blamed the high-profile Reagan ad for the collapse in talks, one official familiar with talks between auto executives and White House officials claimed the ad was largely a pretext.
Are you upset at Premier Doug Ford for running this ad? If this is true that this ad spoiled something that was very close?
Look, I'd say the following, which is that in any complicated, high-stakes negotiation, you can get unexpected twists and turns, and you have to keep your cool during those situations. It doesn't.
Like your trade minister blowing up the entire negotiation. You could see he was looking down, he's scanning around, he's not looking these reporters in the eye. He obviously doesn't want to tell the truth of what happened here.
Pay to be upset. Emotions don't carry you very far. And we had made progress, to repeat. And we stand by the progress that had been made. The government of Canada does. And we are ready, when appropriate, to pick that up. And I'll just reemphasize that it is the responsibility of the government of Canada to have these negotiations.
He knew exactly what happened here and let it fall all on Doug Ford's shoulders. And let me just reinforce how important it is for Canada to get a deal with the United States, as we see here on Trading Economics. We're currently at 73% of our trade is with America. Now, this was up at 78%. And after a year of these tariffs and Mark Carney wheeling and dealing, trying to make more deals around the world, this is the result. A drop of 5% and Canadians losing their jobs. We've also got this chart here, Canada balance of trade. And what do we see? In an ideal world, you'd want to have a bunch of these blue lines or a trade surplus. Instead, we get a bunch of yellow lines. And the only reason why we have a blue line recently is because of the Iran war and the price of oil skyrocketing, which is what we see on this chart as well. This is Canada exports. Mark Carney gets into power right here. And if we look at the last two bars here, February and March, this is when the price of oil skyrocketed. So you remove those two, you can see the drop here in exports out of Canada. Mark Carney not getting a deal, not negotiating with Trump in recent months, this whole trade situation blowing up back in October has been devastating to Canada. Here we've got a clip from Mark Carney. This is on CBC, not just 4 days ago, of him once again blaming this on Doug Ford.
I mean, we're really working to come together. Canadians want to work together. They are independent. I mean, they have their own responsibilities and they're elected and they make decisions. And sometimes it makes life a little more difficult, but that's...
Did Doug Ford make life a little more difficult?
With the ad? Yeah, well, yes, he did. Yes, he did. I mean, but he knows that. And Doug, don't yell at me for pointing out the obvious, but that was true. But you know, on the other decision,
this is not leadership. Carney's not leading. He never takes responsibility for his own failures. Goes on to say here that now they had to pay a tariff to bring cars into Canada, both Stellantis and General Motors, and that's what's really triggered them and sent them to the White House. The official who's familiar with the conversation said. The official alleged the real issue had to do with mounting frustration within the auto sector over how Ottawa was handling the file, a view echoed by two other officials, one of whom said the breakdown had more to do with industry anger over the Canadian government's posturing on autos. So the way Carney handled things and the way Melanie Joly handled things, the Canadian government, the Liberal government handling things, was the real problem here. Threatening to sue, yanking the companies around, not properly negotiating, and then instead they blamed it all on Doug Ford. And you can see Doug Ford is taking heat for it, tanking the polls. Now, that's not directly related to that, obviously, the stuff with the jet more recently. But I mean, Doug Ford has been taking hit after hit here, pretending to be Captain Canada, and he was an easy out for the Liberal Party. They could just point it all at him and say it's all his fault and not have to take any blame for this. Goes on to say Joly didn't respond to the claims, neither did Canada-US Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc, though his office said in a statement he has a goal of getting the best deal for Canadians and families. One of the officials based in Canada said Joly's actions inflamed a very important ally, noting that US automakers have been key partners in making the case for integrated cross-border supply chains. It's not going to be Canadian politicians or Canadian businesses that convince US lawmakers or President Trump to eliminate tariffs and get back to free trade, the Canadian official said. It's going to be American businesses, and we have to be very, very careful on how we treat those partners. Melanie Joly pissed off key members of the business community in America, and this whole thing completely imploded. Going back to October 28th, 2025, this is Pierre Poilievre's press conference in Parliament. And what did Pierre say? He got this whole situation right from the start.
So on the topic of Doug Ford, I'm wondering what you think of how that was handled, whether or not that ad should have been pulled faster.
It's a good question for Mr. Carney. Mark Carney approved the ad. And then he claimed, after the ad started running, that the ad was the reason why no deal happened. So it's time for Mark Carney to come clean. He claims he was on the verge, once again, claims that he was on the verge of getting a deal. Then he approved the ad, and then he blamed the ad for the fact that there is no deal. So the reality is that premiers are stepping up to fill the void left behind by Mark Carney's broken promise. He said he would negotiate a win. He said he would have a deal by July 21st. Still no deal, still no win, still no elbows, still no jobs. If I could. And now Mark Carney is looking for someone to blame for his broken promises, and he's blaming an ad that he approved. So it's time for Mark Carney to stop blaming others and start keeping his promises, his promise being that he would get a deal, that he would lower the tariffs, and that he would get the job done. He has not done that.
He said it right there. He blaming someone else. Pierre called him out, blaming Doug Ford when really this all fell on Mark Carney's shoulders. Melanie Joly was not fit for the job, and Canadians have been the one to pay the price for this. He goes on to say Canada, US, and Mexico now must decide on July 1st whether to renew United States-Mexico-Canada agreement for another 16 years. Otherwise, talks would continue until issues are resolved or the pact expires in 2036. We understand that there are conversations occurring, but that they're not robust. They're certainly not sitting down and dealing with issues, one of the officials said. They're not really negotiating, is what this insider is basically saying. Melanie Joly pissed off the auto industry, the businesses in America, and these American companies went to Donald Trump and complained about how Melanie Joly, the key figure in this story, as well as Dominic LeBlanc and Mark Carney, have been handling negotiations here. They pinned it all on Doug Ford to take the blame. Obviously, they're not going to let this slip out because it'd be bad for Carney in the polls, knowing that his industry minister had destroyed relationships with key business partners in America and have this entire deal fall apart. Now, jumping back over to trading economics, we have this chart here showing Canada terms of trade. Now, in an ideal world, you'd want to see this going up like this, which represents the value of our exports is increasing faster than the price we're paying for imports. But under the Liberals, what do we have? We have this decreasing over the years, meaning the value of our exports is less than the cost of imports, aside from the final bar here, which is the Iran war and the price of oil skyrocketing. Since Mark Carney's become prime minister, we have to export more to buy the same value of imported goods, with these numbers being so sluggish down here. And this is why you don't vote for people who are completely incompetent, like Melanie Joly, who's a complete disaster under Trudeau. And here she is being put in the forefront as industry minister with no credentials to do so. And it turns out she's also awful at creating interpersonal relationships with people. That brings us up until today, where there's this idea now that Carney is slow rolling the negotiations, waiting for midterms, not getting a deal with Trump intentionally because we don't want to get a bad deal. We only want to get a good deal. When in reality, we just saw that his own industry minister blew up the negotiations. He blamed Doug Ford, takes no accountability, and they're not even trying to get a deal.
Well, Kate, on that, when Vandana was talking about maybe the U.S. is feeling pressure and maybe the long game is paying off, you were sort of shaking your head that you disagree with that. I mean, how do you view it in terms of what you're seeing from the U.S.?
Certainly, it's not paying off for Canadians. We've sat on this show and said those countries that have deals have them promptly ignored. We don't have a sectoral deal, and things are changing. But we actually were very close to a sectoral deal back in the fall. The government is conveniently omitting that when they're talking about the nature of the relationship with the United States.
The U.S. walked away from the table.
Right? The U.S. says that it was Canada's action in a particular ad from the Premier of Ontario.
Yes, it was Ontario's action.
That was the source of that. The USTR last week said that he's happy to talk to Canada about critical minerals and an energy pact. He said that right beside the ambassador. It is Canada who is slow rolling this. We had a sectoral deal. Dominic LeBlanc has said that they were trading term sheets associated with that. So if you are looking at today's relief package and wondering if this is a sign that Canada is preparing for the long game, I think it's a pretty good sign, particularly when you consider there's been no meaningful conversation and negotiation happening, including on sectoral tariffs, for now the last 7 months.
But how is Canada slow rolling it if Trump imposed the tariffs, Trump ended the negotiations on the tariffs, and Jameson Greer says you're going to have to live with these tariffs? Like that is how you're slow rolling it.
I don't believe that Greer has said that there is nothing to be done on sectoral tariffs moving forward.
He says it's up to the president. It's nothing he can do. And Donald Trump, he says you have to get used to the fact that there's going to be tariffs.
How is not having a conversation on these things going to improve Canada's position? The hope seems to be that we'll have a more distracted audience in the United States, and I think it's just as likely that if Trump does poorly in the midterms, that he looks to lash out, and Canada will be a convenient whipping post. So hope is not a strategy. The Prime Minister is the one who ran on getting back to the table. I hear a lot of cutting slack and putting this at the feet of the president in terms of, what Canadians are willing to withstand. The Prime Minister is the one who ran the election on being able to fix this issue.
Wow, she went there. What Canadians are willing to withstand. Hope is not a strategy. Kate Harrison dropping truth bombs.
You see it, Rob, as Canada slow rolling this? Because every time I turn on the television or pick up my phone, I see Donald Trump blowing up another part of the global order. Like, that's just what is happening, right? The Strait of Hormuz was open, now it's not. The nuclear program was gone, now it's back. It is just chaos and disruption on the U.S. foreign policy and domestic agenda.
I believe ABC and the Washington Post had a new poll out showing that Trump's approval ratings are now at historic lows. If they're not slow rolling, let's say that it might not be a bad strategy. We will not find out. It depends on really what happens over the next few months. Is it possible, for instance, that Donald Trump, in the lead up to the midterms, runs against countries like Canada, in states like Wisconsin, and other states that are dairy producing states? That's a possibility as well. There is danger in slow rolling.
Oh, yeah.
But there could be fruit, because right now, as I've said before, Donald Trump's political fortunes are in an uncontrolled descent into the earth. And that's something that could play in Canada's favor, because his wings will be clipped if there's a Democratic Congress. There's now a path, apparently, for the Democrats to control the Senate as well.
Yeah.
So
he does everything by executive order, though.
We'll find out in November whether or not.
And that's just it. The executive branch, Donald Trump, the president, gets to control negotiations, dealing with tariffs. So regardless if they clip his wings, he'll still have the power to make a deal, not make a deal, change the tariffs. This is such a bad situation for Canada, because we've got a Prime Minister, Mark Carney, who through his actions seems like he does not want to get a deal. He's not trying to get a deal. And Donald Trump, playing hardball, is not going to easily give up a deal. So we're not going to get a deal.
To paraphrase Minister LeBlanc, on the U.S. side, there seems to be the appearance of motion but no movement. And I think that is underscored by the things that Jameson Greer is saying.
And to end this video off on a lighter note, we've got this story here. Finding work after rehab can be tough, but not at this Michigan wood factory. A wood manufacturing company in the forests of northern Michigan is hiring people straight out of rehab, running a sober house for employees in addiction recovery. This is quite the place. There's numerous stories on here. Like this one says they were on the bad stuff for 10 years. This guy lost his kids, lost his house, lost everything. This Michigan wood factory is turning people's lives around, giving them a second chance. They've even gone so far to take this formerly abandoned motel in town and convert it into employee housing to make it a sober house for their staff in recovery. There are good people in this world doing good things. Could we not bring this model to Canada to save many of our own?